Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Need For Speed Heat. I played it on the Xbox One, it's also available on the PS4. So basically, Need For Speed Heat is about a racing competition that is happening in Tampa, but at the same time, there's like an underground scene that goes on at night, and your character is basically trying to get to the top. And I really wish the story stopped there because, well, Need for Speed doesn't always do the best job with story, unfortunately, but the story does continue on. You and your new friend who is trying to build a new racing crew discover that, well, the cops are shady. They're not just pricks, which, man, they are massive, massive pricks. I mean, holy shit, these guys they're kind of awful. Like, they shouldn't be cops, kind of awful. But they're into some other, like, really shady kind of criminal shit. I won't go into any more detail beyond that, but let's just say that Need for Speed and, like, really awesome story, those aren't two words that I have ever put together. Let's get into the audio. First off, the soundtrack I don't give a fuck about. Quite frankly, all the music in this game just did nothing for me. It did absolutely nothing for me. And I understand that's a me thing, it's not necessarily an everyone thing, but it just, oh god. As for the sound effects, I actually really like the sound effects in this game, from the cars to the city itself. I really enjoy those, and I like the subtle details in the sound. The one that really stood out to me was, I was just kind of slowly driving through an area and I made a turn, and I turned onto a road made out of brick instead of traditional pavement, and you could hear the difference. And that was really impressive to me. As for the voiceover work, it's better than any of the acting that has ever been performed in any of the live action cutscenes that they ever did. That being said, it's still not like award-winning voiceover work, but it is actually pretty decent for a Need for Speed game. Let's get into the gameplay mechanics, and the first thing I am going to bring up is that this is a racing game. The second thing that I'm going to bring up is the fact that in a lot of reviews I've seen them say, they fixed the problems that were in Need for Speed Payback. And to put it simply, that is not a fucking accolade that any game should ever strive for. Improving on Payback is not setting the bar high. Anything that is even vaguely mediocre and not designed to suck the blood out of the consumers who have already purchased the game, well, that is simply a step up over Payback. What they did generally mean by that, though, is that the races, the driving, those are better, as well as the way you upgrade your car is better. For those who don't recall, in Payback, it was a complete lottery system. You won a race, you got a random part with a random boost to your vehicle. You wanted to buy parts? Well, you really couldn't, because once again, they all came with random boosts to your vehicle, so you had no control of how you were actually upgrading your vehicle, because the game was designed for you to piss more money into it. Yeah, it was bullshit. But in Need for Speed Heat, you buy the parts you want, and certain parts will change the way your car works, essentially. And I don't just mean speed, I also mean there's like drift, off-road, specifically racing, specifically road driving, and there are parts that will affect all of those different things. And there are even some hybrid parts that will kind of work a bit of road driving and drift driving, road driving and race driving, etc. I actually really liked that. The depth of cars and customization in Heat are fantastic. It's all wonderful on that end. One thing, however, with buying parts that was not wonderful was somehow I couldn't fucking buy parts at times. For some reason, it wouldn't communicate with like the EA server or whatever, and it just wouldn't let me buy parts. Using in-game money to buy in-game parts, and it would tell me that it couldn't complete the transaction, which just didn't make sense to me, and that happened to me multiple times, and it got pretty frustrating because I had to restart the game when that would happen. A few other small problems are, there are individuals in the game who will show you around and they'll take you on a driving tour, but you have to play follow the leader with them, and like every other video game ever with NPCs that you have to follow, they don't move at the same speed you do. They move considerably slower, and it's just a drag dealing with it. It just slows down the entire experience of the game and gets kind of boring and frustrating. I really enjoyed the races, I liked it. I wish there was a bit more variety in the races. It started to get a little boring and monotonous after a while. And one thing that they tried to do to make the game more expansive and more interesting is have the day and night cycle. It's not actually a cycle, you just choose to race in day or in night. If you race in the day, you earn money, and those are legitimate races. By legitimate, I mean legal, you won't get messed with by the cops or anything like that. And there are some cool benefits to racing in the day because, well, money to buy parts. As well as, it's much easier to switch between vehicles. You literally can just drive up to a race and say you're in your race car, but you want to go do a drift race. You go to the drift race and you can press a button to switch to your drift car. Unfortunately, nighttime is where the game really kind of starts to fall apart for me. Nighttime is when you develop reputation. Those races build your rep, which is like leveling up. You get access to new parts, you get access to new vehicles that way, but you have to race in the day to get the money to buy those things. But unfortunately at nighttime, say you finished a regular race and you want to go do a drift race afterwards, you really can't unless you want to just use your street car in that race, even if it's not designed for drifting. The other problem with nighttime is the cops in the game. It just kind of strips away a lot of the fun dealing with the cops because they are fucking magical and not in a good way. I mean, they just drive erratically, which doesn't help you. They spawn magically, which doesn't help you. It happened to me a few times. After I finished a race, a cop would just spawn in front of me and I'm immediately being chased by the cops. And I would get caught often because of that. Another thing that's really annoying about the cop dynamic at night is the second you finish a race, you immediately develop a wanted level. I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that if at any point in time the cops had been involved in the race, but there are times where I would complete a race and no cops had been in sight the entire time, no cops had chased me during the race, but all of a sudden I'm wanted despite the fact they have no reason to know that I've been racing. And the problem with that is, the second a cop sees you at night then, they start chasing you. The other problem with that being is that your car is apparently made out of cardboard, and theirs are made out of adamantium. So if they hit you, it will completely fuck you and send you off the road, you will lose control, you are in deep shit at that point, whereas if you try and hit them, it's like throwing a paper airplane at a wall. I will say the dynamic of your car weighing nothing and all other cars being able to affect you far more does apply to the daytime races too, so if the other drivers hit you, it fucks you up far more than you can fuck them up by hitting them. It just has greater consequences at night because if you get arrested, you will lose half of your money. So the nighttime element, as much as I wanted to enjoy that because it's adding something new, it really begins to strip away from the game because it's not as well implemented as it could be. Let's get into the controls. I like the controls in this game. They work well, they're well mapped, and they're very responsive. That is in the overall. I will say though, when it comes to drifting, I do wish they were a little more precise and they gave you a bit better direction of how to properly drift. But that being said, the controls did still respond well. Which, I mean, that's incredibly important in a game like this when it's all about speed. That 1 millisecond of not doing something at just the right time can completely ruin an entire race for you. Let's get into the graphics. As I mentioned previously, there are no live action cutscenes, and I love that because those were always awful. They always removed you from the experience, whereas this time it's better, although my character looked like a freak and I really couldn't do much to help him. That being said, you can customize your character. Obviously, that doesn't matter as much as the cars and the city. The amount of customization in the cars is fantastic. I don't just mean performance, but visual customization, and it looks really good. Tire tread, the reflection, the damage you can do. It's not quite as extensive as other games have done, but it's still impressive, and the city itself looks really good. Even when you're traveling at high speed, you can tell the difference between concrete, asphalt, and brick roads, like visually. But I gotta say, one of the things that really blew me away when I was driving around was the weather and lighting effects. If it was raining and the roads were wet, you would get reflections off the road from the sunlight and just stuff like that. And seeing like the reflection of streetlights in puddles at night, all of that was just really impressive to me. So to wrap this up, I don't know how to recommend this game exactly, because while at its core it is good, I feel like the new element of the nighttime versus daytime racing, the nighttime tends to detract from the overall experience, which it just shouldn't. But at the same time, I did enjoy playing it, so I guess if I'm gonna recommend it, it's gonna be a complicated recommendation. If you don't have any other driving games right now, specifically arcadey driving games, this is not a simulator, then yeah, this is not a bad game to pick up. But if you do have another racing game that you are currently into, then you're free to skip this. I just wish they had done the new stuff better, and then I could really fully recommend this game. Okay, so in the comments below, why don't you tell me when you're playing a racing game, are you all about that American muscle, the European imports, or the Asian imports? For me, Asian imports for most things, but if there's drag racing, it's all about the American muscle. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I'm doing in general, share, subscribe. Have a good one.